All right, everybody. So welcome, August 28th, 2020. Thank you, everybody, for joining from wherever you're joining from and taking the time to be a part of it. This is Jefferson Keith Langley. The name of the podcast is called Above, and I just thought it was a poignant word that represented sort of a reminder to myself and to all those who kind of come from this perspective to try to stay above it all and keep yourself up and stay in a high place as much as possible whenever possible. So I picked that word to just represent sort of my ambition to give back and share a little bit of my journey, and at the same time some things that I've explored in my life, and get your input, and your interactivity is important. And anybody who's had sessions with me knows that I'm very tribal. I play group sports at a pretty high level, so my nature is to, sort of one for all and all for one. And this is, yet again another way to take things as a group to, another perspective. So, a little bit about me is, and for those of you who know, please forgive me, but there are people on that don't know me and don't have a clue on why they would ever even listen to my perspective or what I have to say. So I feel it's poignant to kind of share a little bit about myself, and I'll blow through it as quickly as possible. But, I grew up in a small town in Texas. My mother should actually be on the phone right now. So if you're listening, Mom, I love you. Was a very precocious kid. My mother is half Latin, half Native American Indian, and so I had a little bit of a different kind of upbringing in the sense that being a high achiever and in that precocious nature, I was very demanding on everything around me in order to figure out why things were the way they were, and do they have to be that way, and how does it affect people, and if it's affecting people in a negative way, why aren't people doing something about it, and all that kind of stuff. And, my mother exposed me to a lot of very spiritual things. I was, and this is in the 1970s, I was raised around reflexology, acupuncture, acupressure, stone therapy. My mother was a body worker on the side, so she just had a little bit of that Eastern philosophy mentality. And, I never got sick. I always, if anything was happening, it was always like, eat this plant or drink aloe vera or, have some kind of concoction that would solve the problem. And, with that being said, I always thought other kids were that way. I mean, she has still to this day a machine called the Chi machine that if I was, when I was playing high performance sports, and I played all the way to, I was training with, Olympic development teams. I went to a camp at North Texas State University with Pele, and it was like 300 kids that were invited. We stayed in the dorms for 2 weeks, and we trained with Pele personally. We're talking high performing athlete. And my father, who's from another country, is very materialistic and very, in the sense that it's, his form of measure, and rightfully so, is, you succeed, you buy nice things, and you provide for your family, and it's all about nice quality materials. And so when I had that little bit of a juxtaposition, I became sort of a concoction of both worlds. And so as I was growing up, I always knew that, there's no hot or cold with me. People were either like, I love him, he's great, he's amazing, or they freaking hate that guy and they want to, they don't want to have anything to do with me. And so I just kind of assumed that was normal. And especially being a, ethnic kid in a town in Texas where it's, literally I joke about it all the time that there's the brown kid in the class, and in the class pictures, he's on the front row to the left all the time. I remember my mother told me a story where we were at a grocery store, and I was a little baby in a stroller, and one little girl looked at her mommy and said, "Look, God left him in the oven too long." So, I mean, I obviously knew I was different, and then you throw in, oh, he's kind of spiritual, and he's very tribal, and he has this intuitive nature, and I just looked at it like, these are my special powers, and I used them to my advantage, and, she can testify to that, they said things like, man, this kid has eyes in the back of his head. I was the wizard at no-look passes. I wouldn't even have to look that way, and I would just send the ball into space. And, the other players knew if I just go, he'll make sure it's there. So, growing up, and I ended up going to college and playing ball in college, at a pretty high level. I had the luxury of having super high elite coaches from England and Germany. My coach in college was a World Cup player named Nasser, and he got me into, different programs at SMU, Southern Methodist University, which is a Division I school. And by the time I was 19, I was realizing that I had to make a move and get out of this situation of this town that everyone was, kind of either going to stay there for the rest of their lives or move on. And so I moved to LA. I played semi-pro for the first 2.5 years when I lived out here, and they were just starting the MLS. And LA Galaxy wasn't even formed yet, but there was conversations about like, hey, could there be a professional league in America in like the early 1990s? And so I played on the teams that were, they call them feeder, where you the players feed into the bigger bracket to try to get a contract. And at the same time, I was hanging around some very affluent, young, Hollywoodite type kids that were, doing major movies, and, they were pop artists. If I named the bands that I was hanging out with, you'd know them. If I named the actors, they're on Entourage. These were all my close friends, that went on to become super huge. And throughout my life, I always went like, why is it that this dude has no talent and he's freaking massive? He's blowing up and people love him, and this guy can't act his way out of a paper bag. Or why this person cannot sing at all, and they got a contract with Arista Records to open for Pearl Jam. It was just blowing my mind. And throughout my life, I would see this, and I'd inquisitively, with that precocious nature, go, there's something more to this. There's got to be, because it's obviously not being judged on the merit and being judged on the forms of measure that you would think it'd be measured on. So I'm the guy that asks, that I learned, it's not the answers, it's how good you can get at the questions. And so I started asking super evolved, intricate questions like, what does that person have inside them that tells the outside world that he should be the one that's in that role, or that you should be generous to that woman because they have something inside them that triggers you to say it's her. And so I would just, I went on this investigation a little bit like a spiritual Sherlock Holmes, and I would look into it in such a deep level. And throughout this journey, I've had success. I've done some amazing things, and I'm happy to send you my bio if that matters. But, I've worked with, clients like Meta World Peace from the LA Lakers. I've done sessions with them. I've done sessions with Senior Vice President of Fox. I've, the ambassador to Bahamas for the Obama administration, all the way down to, a mom and pop person that was a teacher that wanted to build a jewelry line, and we ended up getting her a deal with Goop, which is Gwyneth Paltrow's company. So I've seen it all. And in my own life, I, have not, it's not like I was raised with a silver spoon. I've seen my own darkness. I tell this to clients, I tell this to people, that I don't think I'm better than anybody else. I think what I have that maybe other people haven't explored is that there's nothing in my life and in me that I'm not willing to look at and figure out why is that there and what does that do to me and how does that affect other people around me, and is that helping write the story in the picture around me that I want to project. And you know, I've had it all. I've flipped houses in LA with a billionaire who, if I said his name, and the houses he builds, he owns three of the biggest home building companies in the country. He was executive of the year for Forbes 2006, 2004. So I mean, it's not like I haven't been around it, and it's not like I haven't experienced, but I've also experienced the other side. I've walked through hell. I've been in hell. I've crawled on the floor. I've lost everything. I've had stalkers. I've had people threaten me. When I was 4 years old, I almost drowned in Lake Texoma. At 15 years old, me and some of my buddies were jumped, and the guy stabbed me in the neck with a broken bottle, and he missed my jugular by, they said, a little over an inch. I still have the scar in my neck to this day. I've had a silver-plated 22 caliber gun put to the center of my forehead, and he pulled the trigger and it jammed. And everybody standing around were screaming, you know, no. So I mean, I've seen the devil. I've seen evil and negativity at the hardest core. I've been, you know, my character's been assassinated. As much as I've seen wealth and success, I've seen the other side. I lived in a barn for 2 months when I had nowhere to go, when I lost everything. Slept in a horse barn, you know, doing work around the farm so that I had a place to stay, working with the horses. So I've seen everything. So in that journey, you know, I was able to kind of look at things and find the blessings in both sides. You know, okay, I've learned this. And you don't just learn from negative experiences. That's just absolutely not true. You learn from positive experiences if you want to. And if you want to learn from negative experiences, you can do that as well. So about 4 years ago, I ended up running into some monks and ended up living in the mountains with some monks at a temple for 3.5 months, being of service. I'm not a Buddhist. I'm not here to preach about religion or anything. I'm just purely here to talk about what the topic is about, which is, you know, the function and mechanics of a human being. How do they operate? What is it that I could share with you that might give you some insight or open up your perspective about, hey, wait a minute, you know, he said something interesting that resonated with me, and I'm going to take that and make it my own and go and explore that and use it to my advantage. If nothing resonates with you, then I appreciate the time, and, you know, I keep moving, and, you know, we all keep doing our thing. So when I lived with these monks, you know, they ended up nicknaming me James Bond because they said that, you know, I'm like this lone soldier on this dark road who's here for, you know, redemption, here to, you know, share the experience with others so that they can go, hey, I don't have to go through that. He's kind of shed the light on something. And you know, with my kind of warrior nature, you know, I feel it's sort of a nice blend, and you know, people have either loved that side of me, that I'm the guy that'll stand up. You know, while I was at the temple, I experienced watching people who are the parishioners come to the temple and ask for blessings, and for the monks to chant for them and ask Buddha for blessings in their life, and bringing them broken speakers, bringing them rotten rice bags that had been sitting in their garage. And I, of course, said something. That's just my nature, like, that's not cool, man. What are you doing? And, of course, it became a big thing. They ended up getting together and having me thrown out of the temple. But, you know, I'm fine with that because I feel like something needed to be done. And that in and of itself is why I went down this road of kind of this expedition throughout my life to figure out sort of the secrets behind how do human beings function and what are their mechanics, and kind of find those little needles in a haystack, those little gems that kind of give a little bit more perspective on how we operate. Now, We're going to delve into it, and we're going to talk about a little bit about those functions. But I wanted to open up real quick. If anybody has any questions, let me unmute you real quick, and we can continue. All right. So does anybody have any questions? Anybody have anything that they want to contribute as of this time? No? Crickets. All right, let's keep moving. So let's talk about what you need to know to balance the scale of why I got into this, and it's going to reveal a little bit about sort of what you can look at yourself in order to go, wait a minute, okay. It bothered me, and I cared enough to do this because I walked around watching people get their asses kicked. I mean, the negative experiences, the negative energy, whatever you want to call it, the evil, the devil, whatever it is, I watched it happen and going like, this is horrible. I don't understand what's happening. Why does that person cut themselves? Or why is this person feeling the way they're feeling when it absolutely is not true at all? What is this thing about like insecurity? Why are these pictures coming into my head and into people's head that make this negative experience happen? And where are they coming from? So I kind of sat back and I, with that side of me that was bothered, that was like, something's got to be done. I had a friend who suffered from muscular dystrophy. His name's Trevor, Joe Kimson, and Trevor never walked a day in his life. He never said a word a day in his life. He was never supposed to live past 7, and he lived till he was 14. And his family and my parents and his parents were friends. And I would ride on the back of his. They built these little pegs on the back of his electric wheelchair, and I would ride around the neighborhood with him on the sidewalks, standing on the back, holding onto the handrails. And kids would throw rocks at him. I mean, they would throw rocks at a kid who literally can't speak. But this kid was part of Mensa, and he scored 10 points below a perfect score on the SAT. I mean, literally, he was like a Stephen Hawking. And I would look at that and go, obviously I'd get in little scuffles with kids, but, I would look at it and go, how does this kid, what does he have in him that gives him the ability to take a test like that, but he can't even say hello? And so I started looking at it, and in my time with the monks, I was blessed enough to hang out with some NASA scientists. They were the people responsible for building the artificial intelligence for the space shuttle that still is in the ships today. And we spent a long time, and they talked about that when they would they would come into work, they would be put through a protocol before they're able to work on the experiments to make sure that they were in the right place and the right frame of mind, and that their vibe was in a good working order. Otherwise, they'd affect the experiment in a negative way. And I stood there and went like, what do you mean? I don't understand. And so we talked and we delved into it. And when they would explain it, I kept looking at it and I go, that sounds like a human being. And they're going, no, it's AI, it's the computer. I'm going, yeah, but just what you described on how it functioned and how it built systems to try to avoid pain, and it would build systems to try to avoid negative experiences. We do that too. So where do those systems go? Once you build a system to avoid a negative experience, obviously the system doesn't leave. Now you have a system that's running around trying to avoid negative experiences all the time. And so when we talked about how subatomic particles work, and, we talked about different scientists, there's a famous scientist, obviously everybody knows, Sir Isaac Newton, and Newton has this theory that ultimately got proven that deep space is a vacuum, and there's energy waves that make up everything. And those energy waves would disappear in the vacuum unless there was something else in resistance to press back against it that they called the ether. And that, I think it took them 12 years to prove it. They ended up proving that it does exist. And then they started figuring out there were other dimensions and all this kind of stuff. And here we are to this day. So if you're asking yourself, like, okay, this guy's going nuts right now, but what does this have to do with my business? Or because if you're walking around with systems in you that are co-writing your daily moments, and you don't know what those systems are because you haven't had enough conversations with yourself to figure those out, then you are at a major disadvantage against all the other people in the game of life. When you look at Michael Jordan or Michael Jackson or Celine Dion, all these people that do things at amazing levels, you can look at them and you'll say to yourself, they were built to do that.